Marla didn't usually talk to strangers, especially not the kind who muttered to themselves and wandered behind the diner at closing time. But that Tuesday night, with too much soup left in the pot and no one else to give it to, she packed it into a paper bag and stepped outside. The man stood by the dumpster, eyes fixed on the stars like they were whispering to him. His coat was torn. His hands, trembling. She offered the bag without a word. He looked at her, really looked, then nodded once and took it. She expected him to disappear like the others had. But instead, he sat down on the curb and began to hum a tune she hadn't heard in decades, her father's lullaby. The same notes. The same rhythm. Marla's breath caught in her chest. She stepped back, the bag still in his hands. The air around him suddenly felt different. She hadn't told anyone that song in years, certainly not a stranger behind the diner. It was a tune her father had made up, one he sang only to her during storms when the windows rattled and her childhood heart pounded. Hearing it again, perfectly, from a man she'd never met sent a tremor down her spine. Marla forced a smile and whispered, "Where'd you learn that?" The man paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Didn't learn it," he said quietly. It was just there. His voice wasn't mocking. If anything, it was distant, like someone who'd just woken from a long dream. Then he added, almost apologetically, "It helps calm the ones who are listening." Marla frowned. "Who's listening?" He looked past her, toward the empty lot across the street. "You'll hear them soon. But only if you're kind." The words didn't make sense. But neither did the tears suddenly welling in her eyes. That night, Marla couldn't sleep. The melody echoed in her mind like a phantom heartbeat, steady and strange. She sat by her kitchen window, the soup pot still unwashed, and stared into the darkness outside. Across the street, where the stranger had glanced, the vacant lot looked the same, overgrown, silent, forgotten. But just before midnight, the wind shifted. Leaves rustled though no breeze stirred. And for the briefest second, she thought she heard voices, not loud, not clear, but layered like echoes from another room. Names. Or maybe fragments of prayers. She pressed her hand to the glass. Nothing. Only silence. She returned to bed, unsettled. Yet beneath the confusion was something quieter, deeper, a pull. The next morning, the man was gone. But in the place where he'd sat, there was a folded napkin. On it, scrawled in childlike print, were just 5 words. "You listened. So they will." By morning, Marla had nearly convinced herself it was a dream. The song, the napkin, the strange words, they could have all been fragments of an exhausted mind. She poured coffee, opened the diner as usual, and greeted the regulars with her practiced smile. But as the morning rush faded, a woman stepped inside Marla had never seen before. She looked young, but her eyes carried age. She didn't order anything. She just walked up to the counter and whispered, "You fed him." Marla stiffened. "Excuse me?" The woman smiled, not kindly, not unkindly, just, knowingly. "You gave what you had. He gave you something back. Most don't notice. But you did." Marla stared, heart thudding. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, the woman slid a crumpled envelope across the counter. "When it begins, don't be afraid of the names." Then she left, just like that. No explanation. Just a chill in the air that hadn't been there before. Marla stared at the envelope for hours before daring to open it. The paper was thick, old, yellowed at the edges. Inside wasn't a letter, but a list. Dozens of names. Some familiar, some foreign, and some she hadn't heard since childhood. At the very bottom, written in smaller script, was her father's full name, Walter K. Halberd. Her hands trembled. That name hadn't been spoken aloud since his funeral 20 years ago. Why was it there? Who else on this list had died? That night, unable to shake the feeling, she sat outside the diner long after closing. She kept the list in her lap, watching shadows stretch and coil across the lot. Around 1 a.m., the hum returned, not mechanical, not electrical, but almost human. Voices. Just under the sound of wind. And then a soft whisper, right behind her ear. One remembered becomes two. Two become many. Marla spun around. No one was there. The next morning, Marla did something she hadn't done in years. She called her sister. They hadn't spoken since the inheritance fight. But something about seeing their father's name, hearing that lullaby, stirred a memory too heavy to carry alone. "Did Dad ever talk in his sleep?" she asked, out of nowhere. A pause. Then her sister whispered, "You remember that too?" Marla froze. "He used to murmur names," her sister continued. "I thought it was nonsense. But he'd cry sometimes. Whisper things like, 'Tell her I didn't forget.' I never knew who her was." Marla's throat tightened. She pulled out the list again and scanned through it. Halfway down, Henrietta Shaw, their grandmother's sister, who'd vanished during the war. She'd never been found. And yet, next to Henrietta's name, in faint ink, was one more line. He sang for her, too. Marla closed her eyes. Something old was waking. And she was part of it now. That evening, Marla returned to the diner early. She brought the list, the napkin, and her father's old notebook, tucked away in a drawer for decades. Flipping through its brittle pages, she didn't know what she was looking for, until she found it. A single page, dated April 3, 1957. Scribbled in the margins were lines of the lullaby. But below them, in shaky handwriting, he'd written, "Voices gather where kindness is offered. Memory feeds them. Music holds them." Her breath caught. It couldn't be coincidence. And then she noticed something else. The names in her father's notebook, half of them matched the ones on the list from the stranger's envelope. People her father had known. Or remembered. Or maybe, helped carry. For the first time, Marla considered a truth too strange to ignore. Her father hadn't just sung to her to soothe her nightmares. He might have been soothing someone else's. That night, unable to rest, Marla brought her father's notebook to the vacant lot. She sat where the man once had, heart pounding as the darkness thickened. She whispered the lullaby into the still air, not to summon, not to impress, just to remember. And something answered. Not in words, but in feeling. A swell of warmth in her chest. A sudden scent of lilac, her grandmother's perfume. The distant clatter of typewriter keys, her father's old job. And through it all, a quiet presence, like being wrapped in the memory of someone who once loved you completely. She didn't know whether to cry or run. Then came the voice again, not behind her this time, but within. "You remember. So we remain." It wasn't haunting. It was healing. For the first time, Marla understood, this wasn't about ghosts. It was about presence, sustained by small acts of kindness. A kind of emotional storytelling written into time itself. The next day, the diner felt different. Not busier, just heavier, like the walls had absorbed more than heat and conversation. 3 strangers came in that morning. None of them ordered. One left a pressed flower. One hummed the same lullaby under their breath. The third simply said, "It's beginning. Prepare your table." She didn't ask questions. She only nodded. That night, Marla cleared the last booth by the window. She set out one bowl of soup and a cloth napkin. Then she wrote on a slip of paper. "I remember. I'm listening." She placed it beneath the spoon. By morning, the soup was gone. In its place, another list. Longer. Names she'd never heard of, and one she had, Clara Jennings. Her childhood best friend. Gone since '82. Next to Clara's name were two words in ink that shimmered faintly. Still singing. Marla sat down. Whatever this was, it wasn't finished. It was only just beginning. By the end of the week, Marla wasn't the only one hearing the hum. A young delivery boy froze mid-shift, eyes wide, claiming he heard someone whisper his grandmother's name, though she'd passed before he was born. A nurse on the night shift reported hearing an old hymn echo through an unplugged intercom. Even Father Rourke paused mid-sermon, staring at the stained glass window as if something behind it had called his childhood nickname. The whispers weren't loud. They were gentle, woven into the background noise of daily life, whined through trees, radio static, the clink of coffee mugs. But for those who paid attention, they came with a feeling of being seen. Remembered. Held. Word spread, not as panic, but as quiet awe. No one could explain it. Except Marla. She didn't say much. But every night, she prepared a bowl. Left a napkin. And always, the note beneath. I remember. I'm listening. The change wasn't dramatic, it was tender, almost imperceptible. People lingered longer at the diner, even if they didn't order. Some brought photos. Others brought names. They'd slip them quietly to Marla, old classmates, lost siblings, mothers who never came home from the hospital. No one demanded answers. They only asked. Can you remember them too? Marla never said no. And that's when it started. Those who left a name often came back days later, eyes glassy, saying they'd heard laughter in their sleep. A war vet claimed he smelled his father's pipe smoke for the first time in 40 years. A mute girl drew a picture of a woman she'd never met, who turned out to be her great-grandmother. It wasn't about ghosts. It was about acknowledgement. About stitching lost voices back into the fabric of now. Marla realized she'd become something more than a waitress. She was a keeper of remembrance, one act of kindness at a time. Not everyone embraced the change. A city official stopped by, disturbed by the superstition growing around the diner. You're encouraging delusion, he told Marla. People need closure, not fairy tales. But Marla only offered him tea and silence. That night, the man awoke in sweat. A woman's voice, soft and urgent, had whispered his childhood nickname, the one only his late mother had used. He swore he saw her shadow in the hallway mirror. The next morning, he returned to the diner. Said nothing. Just slid a torn photograph across the counter. His mother, smiling. Can you remember her, too? He asked quietly. Marla nodded. She added the name to the growing list. Folded it into a napkin. Left it at the booth by the window. And when she checked the table the next day, there was a single silver thimble left behind. Her father used to say, memory mends more than time ever will. And now, she was beginning to believe it. One Sunday morning, the local radio crackled to life with a strange anomaly. A soft hum interrupted the weather report, followed by a single name, Jameson Eli Hart. Dead air. Then static. Then silence. Marla dropped her coffee. That was the name of the boy who used to sweep the diner's steps for coins, before he drowned at 12. She hadn't heard that name aloud in 30 years. But she wasn't the only one listening. Calls flooded the station, listeners from nearby towns, even counties away, asking about the names they'd heard. Each one unique. Each one, someone lost. Soon, other towns noticed. Radios in hardware stores, school buses, hospital waiting rooms, once silent between songs, now whispered old lullabies, fading memories, voices that didn't belong to the present, but also didn't want to be forgotten. And always, someone would whisper. I thought I was the only one who remembered. Marla knew now, she hadn't opened a door. She'd answered a call. By midweek, the town no longer treated it as coincidence. Elderly residents began gathering in silence near the radio tower at dusk, not to protest, but to listen. Children stopped asking who the voices belonged to and started asking what they wanted remembered. People began writing letters to the diner, some from hours away. In them were names, lullabies, phrases long forgotten. She called me Sugar Snap, or he always whistled before opening the door. Marla pinned them up on the diner walls. They formed a mosaic of grief and grace, a gallery of human echoes. And that night, for the first time, the whispering came not as fragments, but as chorus. Voices layered and warm. Soft as breath. Powerful as floodwater. They said only one phrase, over and over, rising through the walls of the diner and into the marrow of anyone nearby. We are still here. Because you are. Marla, wiping tears from her cheek, whispered back, we hear you. With the voices growing louder, not everyone felt comforted. A few townsfolk began whispering darker theories. What if it's not the dead, or what if we're being used? One night, someone spray-painted across the diner's windows. Close the door. Marla didn't flinch. She simply cleaned it off at sunrise and placed 3 extra bowls at the window table. But inside, doubt crept in. That evening, a storm rolled in. Lightning cut through the sky as the radio buzzed with static and sobbing. This time, the voices weren't gentle. They were urgent. Begging. Don't let them silence us. Stay open. We're not done. And then, silence. The booth by the window was empty. No note. No object left behind. Just a faint burn mark on the table's surface, in the shape of a hand. Marla stared at it, heart pounding. For the first time, she whispered not to them, but to herself. What have I invited in? The burn mark didn't fade. In fact, it deepened, as if something unseen was pressing into it from the other side. By morning, silverware near the window booth bent slightly, humming low and constant. The napkin holder rattled, though no wind passed. Then the dreams began. Everyone who had offered a name, every person who had listened, reported the same thing, a corridor of flickering lights, lined with doors. Behind each door, a voice they'd forgotten. A memory they hadn't known was theirs. Some returned from sleep smiling. Others woke in tears. But one man, a retired history teacher, didn't wake at all. He passed quietly in his recliner, a photo of his brother on his lap, a faint smile on his face. At his funeral, the priest paused mid-sentence, eyes distant. He looked straight at Marla and said, in a voice not quite his own. He got to say goodbye. Because of you. She didn't cry. She only whispered, then it was worth it. Marla couldn't stop thinking about him, the man by the dumpster, with eyes like starlight and a lullaby no stranger should have known. She returned to the alley where it began. The ground was undisturbed, save for a patch of moss shaped vaguely like footprints, bare, long gone. As she knelt, something glinted beneath a rusted can, a matchbox, aged and brittle. On it, written in looping script. For the ones who carry memory. Inside was a photo, grainy, black and white. The man, younger. Standing in front of a hospital tent. Behind him, rows of cots. Wartime. His name written on the back, Jonas Halberd. Her breath caught. Halberd. Her father's brother. The uncle no one ever spoke of. Marla raced home, tore through her father's things, and there, in the back of an old Bible, was a letter, never sent, never opened. Addressed to Jonas. And in the final line. If you find her, give her what I never could, peace. Marla sat in silence. It hadn't started with soup. It had started long before her. Marla unfolded the letter with trembling hands. Her father's handwriting, shaky but deliberate, stretched across the page like a final confession. I sang for her, Jonas. Just like you did in the field tents. But I never told her the song was yours. I was too proud, too broken to admit I borrowed your lullaby. Her throat tightened. If you find her, if you find my daughter, tell her the melody was born from your kindness. That her peace was always your gift, not mine. Tears blurred the ink. The man behind the diner hadn't been just a stranger, he was the unseen thread that held her family's quiet compassion together. The humming. The names. The warmth. It wasn't magic. It was inheritance. Passed not through blood alone, but through kindness. Through emotional storytelling that crossed decades, stitched with soup and memory and song. Marla pressed the letter to her chest. She wasn't just remembering the lost anymore. She was completing them. On the first Sunday of October, the diner didn't open. Not because Marla was ill, but because something larger was unfolding. From dawn, people began gathering silently outside, drawn by instinct more than invitation. They brought folding chairs, old radios, faded photographs. A boy held a cassette tape. A woman clutched her late husband's army tag. No one spoke, but everyone listened. At exactly 9:07 a.m., every radio, regardless of station, went silent. Then, a soft chime. And a single voice. If you remember them, they are not gone. Then the names began. Hundreds of them. Spoken slowly, reverently. Some were common. Others nearly forgotten. Each one drew a quiet gasp, a tear, a nod. Then something remarkable, the wind began to hum, not howl, but hum, in the same key as the lullaby. Some called it strange. Others called it holy. But everyone felt it. The town wasn't mourning anymore. It was witnessing. As the names continued, people closed their eyes, not to escape, but to return. Some whispered, "I'm sorry." Others whispered, "Thank you." One elderly man, usually stoic, broke down sobbing when his sister's name, lost in a fire at age 6, floated through the speakers. A little girl tugged her father's sleeve and said, "That was Grandpa's song, though he'd passed before she was born." A teenager stood frozen as her late mother's voice, clipped from an old voicemail, was somehow threaded into the wind. But the most powerful moment came when the voices quieted, and for 30 full seconds, the town stood in complete silence. No cars. No phones. Just presence. Then, from the diner's roof speaker, came Marla's voice, unsteady but clear. "We are made of stories. And the ones we remember, make us whole." Someone began to sing the lullaby. One voice. Then two. Then the whole crowd. And for the first time, no one felt alone. When the song faded, the mayor stepped forward. He wasn't a believer, never had been. But his voice trembled when he spoke. "What do we do now?" No one answered. Not immediately. Then Marla stepped onto the diner's stoop. She held nothing, no papers, no letters, no lists. Just her presence. Her choice. "I'll keep the window booth open," she said softly. "But only if we all agree, this isn't mine to carry alone." One by one, hands rose. Not in vote, but in solidarity. A farmer's calloused palm. A teacher's ink-stained fingers. A child's fist gripping a Polaroid. They weren't just remembering anymore. They were participating. The diner would become more than a place to eat. It would become a living archive of names, laughter, and song, a sanctuary of emotional storytelling, where remembrance wasn't an act of sorrow, but of service. The veil had thinned. And they weren't afraid. They were ready. Weeks passed. The diner never advertised, but it was never empty. People arrived from out of state, drawn by whispers, old postcards, or just a feeling they couldn't name. They'd sit at the window booth, sometimes for hours, holding nothing but memory. And when they left, Marla would find something small left behind, a toothpick boat, a harmonica, a broken watch, each with a name tucked beneath. She no longer needed to hear the voices to know they were present. They were in the quiet nods, in the way strangers shared booths without speaking. In how children began humming tunes they'd never been taught. And every few nights, she'd find a folded napkin at her door. Always blank, except for the initials JH and a single word. Still. Not gone. Not haunting. Just still, as in present, as in listening. She would smile, tuck it in the drawer, and keep the soup warm. Years later, a small museum opened across from the diner. Not built by the town council, but by the townspeople themselves. They called it the Room of Remembering. Inside were shelves of objects left behind, marbles, diaries, keys with no locks. Each item catalogued not by function, but by who it meant something to. Tourists came expecting legends. They left speaking softer, eyes misted. A few claimed they dreamed of people they'd never met, and woke knowing exactly what to forgive. Marla, older now, moved slower, but her table by the window remained untouched. The bowl. The napkin. The note. I remember. I'm listening. Children born long after the first whispers would ask, what did she hear? And their parents would smile and say, not what. Who? Because in this town, stories no longer needed explaining. They were simply lived. Passed on. And when remembered with kindness, they never truly ended. Sometimes, visitors still ask if the voices ever returned. Marla only smiles and gestures to the booth. They never left, she says. You just have to be quiet enough to hear them. And perhaps that's the truth, we don't lose people, we lose the habit of remembering. But when we cook their favorite soup, hum their song, or whisper their name into a quiet room, they find their way back. Not as ghosts. As presence. As story. So tonight, if you're alone, consider this: who would be comforted by being remembered? What lullaby might still echo in your chest if you let it? Write the name. Light the candle. Stir the soup. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness, like giving away leftovers, opens a door no one else can see. And through that door, stories walk in. Hungry not for answers, but for acknowledgement. This is more than just a tale. It's your invitation. Will you remember them, too?